Welcome to The Explainer. So, today we're jumping straight into this fascinating and honestly kind of delicate balance between our deep inner motivations and the external constraints we actually need to get things done.
I mean, have you ever wondered why you can absolutely crush certain goals without even thinking about it, while others just feel like this monumental, exhausting uphill battle? We beat ourselves up, right? We blame a lack of discipline. We tell ourselves to just try harder. But sheer discipline, it's rarely the whole story. As we're going to see today, running purely on willpower is basically a fast track to burnout. Real execution happens when we seamlessly blend who we are on the inside with the environments we design on the outside.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's how we're going to break it down today. First, we'll look at the habit-identity connection. Then, discovering your integrated self. Third, we'll talk about when willpower isn't enough. Fourth, the power of forcing functions. And finally, designing your own constraints. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the habit-identity connection. We're starting on the inside, really looking at how our daily routines form the very core of who we believe we are. So, there's this really fascinating piece of research from Frontiers in Psychology that talks about the true self. In psychology terms, this is the subjective experience of an integrated self. Basically, it means everything is highly connected. Your cognitive, affective, motivational, and behavioral systems are all working together in harmony. Now, obviously, not every single habit becomes part of this true self. I mean, we all have mindless routines, like which chair we sit in or, how we tie our shoes. But for a behavior to actually become part of your integrated self, it has to hit two conditions. It's got to be frequent and automatic, and, this is the absolutely crucial part, it has to be linked to your core values. According to the researchers, there are 10 basic value domains that drive us. We're talking about things like hedonism, stimulation, self-direction, universalism, benevolence, conformity, tradition, security, power, and achievement. Think about it like this. Taking the same exact route to work is a habit, sure, but calling your parents every single Sunday, that expresses a core value, like tradition or benevolence. And when a habit expresses one of those fundamental values, it doesn't just stay a routine. It deeply fortifies your identity. It literally becomes a statement of who you are.
Let's move to Section 2, discovering your integrated self, and see how this builds when we look at the hard data.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the data from the first study in that Frontiers research. The researchers were mapping out the relationship between habit identity associations, cognitive self-bias, and self-esteem. And what they found is that people who strongly tie their habits to their sense of identity actually show stronger cognitive self-integration, meaning they process self-relevant information way faster and more efficiently. But here's the best part. Those same people also exhibited significantly higher self-esteem and were much closer to their ideal self. To put that into perspective, when your habits actually align with your identity, it literally changes your brain's cognitive processing for the better. It's almost like a superpower.
So the researchers wanted to push this even further in a second study to see, can we actively manipulate this connection? They introduced something called value affirmation. They asked participants to not just list out their habits, but to explicitly indicate why they were doing them by picking a core value. And the results were pretty wild. Generating habits in the explicit context of these goals significantly strengthened the bond between the habit and the person's identity, especially compared to the control group. Just by actively affirming the value behind the habit, they were building a much stronger, more integrated self.
Which brings us to Section 3, when willpower isn't enough. Because, look, to actually conquer the execution gap, we have to be realistic here. Even if you have the strongest integrated self on the planet, your internal motivation is inevitably going to waver. You get stressed, you get tired, other priorities pop up. So what do we do then?
Well, it really comes down to this contrast. On one side, we have internal drive, right? That's our discipline, our true self, our motivation. That is the engine. But on the other side, we have external scaffolding. These are things like forcing functions and built-in constraints. Think of this as your safety net. Pure motivation without any structure usually just stalls out the second your energy dips. Discipline is fantastic, don't get me wrong, but it's an internal drive, and it fluctuates. We absolutely need that external scaffolding to catch us and close the execution gap when our internal engine inevitably sputters.
And that leads us perfectly into Section 4, the power of forcing functions. Let's get highly actionable here. How do we actually build that external scaffolding? Well, we borrow from user experience and productivity strategies.
There's this brilliant quote from executive coach Chris Sparks that defines this perfectly. He says, a forcing function is, quote, a catalyst that changes your default behavior in the future by matching near-term incentives with long-term goals. In other words, it is an external constraint. It could be a hard deadline, a public promise, or a blocking step in your software. It's a mechanism that takes a flimsy, we really should do this, and turns it into an absolute, we must do this. It basically makes inaction way more painful and costly than just taking action.
If you look closely at the world of design, forcing functions are literally everywhere, mostly just protecting us from ourselves. Don Norman, a total pioneer in design, calls these lockouts and interlocks. Just think about your microwave. It physically will not let you open the door while it's running, right? That is a forcing function. Or in a much more high-stakes scenario, hospitals intentionally remove concentrated potassium from general wards. They don't just cross their fingers and rely purely on the internal discipline of exhausted nurses to not make a mistake. They completely design the environment to prevent the error in the first place.
So drawing on some great insights from Parallel HQ, there are 5 main levers we can pull to create these constraints in our own lives and workflows. First up, time-based, like scheduling a soft weekly demo or signing a hard contractual deadline. Second is commitment and accountability. Think public promises or even putting money on the line where you literally lose cash if you miss a milestone. Third is design-based. Those are the interlocks or the confirmation prompts that stop you from acting prematurely. Fourth is environmental, changing your context entirely, like saying, okay, no meetings ever on Tuesday mornings. And fifth, honestly the most powerful one, hybrid. This is where you mix them together. Like a company hack week, you've got a time box, a totally different environment, and intense peer accountability. Mixing these levers, it creates unbelievable momentum for both individuals and product teams.
All right, Section 5, designing your own constraints. So, the crucial point is, how do you actually implement these strategies as a focused learner in your own life? Let's walk through it.
Implementing a forcing function has to be deliberate. You can't just wing it. Here is the exact step-by-step procedure. Step 1, define the precise target behavior you want to trigger. Step 2, pick the right mechanism. I mean, don't use a design lockout if the real issue is just a lack of accountability, right? Step 3, set the intensity. You want it to nudge you, but you don't want it to cause a massive, stressful backlash. Step 4, and actually, scratch that, this might be the most important step. Add slack. A good forcing function should nudge your behavior without completely overwhelming it. You have to leave a little room for exceptions or you're going to burn out. And finally, step 5, monitor the impact and tweak it as you learn.
To show you exactly why this matters, let's look at a real-world story from Parallel HQ. They were working with this machine learning startup, about 15 engineers. The team was smart, they had clear ideas, but their execution was completely stalling out. Projects just kept rolling over week after week. So they introduced a hybrid forcing function. They set up weekly demo days, instituted meeting-free mornings, and made a public changelog. The results? Absolutely astounding. Within just 2 months, their average cycle time dropped from 20 days down to 14, and the amount of shipped stories per release boosted by 30%. Now, they didn't magically get smarter or develop monk-like discipline overnight. They just brilliantly utilized external constraints to drive their performance.
Well, we've covered a ton of ground today. We've seen that true productivity is really this beautiful synergy. It's about cultivating an integrated self, where your habits align deeply with your core values, but also accepting human fallibility. We have to design external forcing functions to catch us when we inevitably stumble. So I want to leave you with this question to ponder. What external constraint will you set today to protect your most valued internal habit? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope you use these tools to